Hello there, and welcome to the Rise of the Education Entrepreneurs panel. My name is Shannon Williams, and I serve as Senior Vice President of Community Engagement and Communications at the Mind Trust. The Mind Trust is an education nonprofit that works to ensure that all children have access to a high-quality education, regardless of the color of their skin, regardless of the neighborhood that they live in, and regardless of their family's income. We work to ensure that all children have access to a high quality education by recruiting exceptionally talented school leaders, providing schools with really strong conditions for success, and intentionally engaging the community. The Mind Trust staff prides ourselves on providing transformative education opportunities that are rooted in equity. Today is Education Day for this conference, and the Mind Trust is a proud sponsor. We're so incredibly excited to be participants of this really special initiative. And I'm excited to dig into this conversation because we have some phenomenal leaders on the panel who will share their wealth and knowledge with us. At the Mind Trust, we are intentional about students of color achieving at high levels. And while Black and Brown students at charter and innovation schools in Indianapolis are faring better than their counterparts in traditional public schools, more improvement needs to be made. And to increase the achievement levels of students of color and low-income students, we need to focus on what really matters: high standards and visionary school leaders. And that's where our distinguished panelists come into play. Our education system is ripe for disruption and innovation, and our panel has some amazingly talented education entrepreneurs who are leading boldly to create great outcomes for students. I'd like to introduce those leaders to you now. Dr. Jamie Bracy Green is CEO of the National Institute for Inclusive Competitiveness. The NIIC is a national hub for inclusive competitive strategists positioned to play a critical role in planning and implementing strategies that increase the asset ownership, intergenerational wealth, and job creation productivity of high-need regions. Kimberly Neal is the founder and executive director of Believe Schools. Believe Circle City is a rigorous college and career preparatory high school designed to develop students' identity, agency, leadership, and purpose. Believe Circle City students engage in a micro-society that allows all students to develop the necessary skills to be successful in career or college, whichever path they choose. Errol Martin Phelan is the founder and CEO of Phelan Leadership Academies. Earl is a nationally recognized education leader with a track record of successful leadership and innovation. He currently has schools in Indiana, Michigan, Texas, Alabama, Ohio, and Washington, D.C. And Mariama Shahid is CEO and head of school at Global Preparatory Academy. At Global Prep, students receive instruction in both Spanish and English throughout the day and develop strong critical thinking skills through a curriculum that engages their creativity. So welcome each of you. It's so great to see you. We'll dig right into the panel. Hey, Kim. We'll dig right into the discussion. So each leader on this panel is a dedicated educator with many years of experience. We know that entrepreneurship is a non-traditional path in the education field. So can each of you explain how you came to this point in your career? And let's start with Kim.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thanks so much, Shannon. This was a long journey for me. I came to this point in my career by the way of Teach for America, by the way of working in traditional public schools, by the way of working in independent charter schools and large charter networks across our country. Having had all of those experiences, I realized that I hadn't seen what I would be looking for my own child in the landscape that I was in. At that point, I knew that it was time to create something different, and I felt like we needed more organizations like Earl's and like Mariama's that are started for us and by us and for us. And that was really important to me. which is why I decided to go into entrepreneurship and make sure that we're creating more schools in the space that are specifically designed to address the unique needs of Black and Brown students.
Thank you for that, Kim. And Mariama, how about you go next? So you have extensive experience in the education field. You were formerly recognized as Teacher of the Year, tremendous accolades throughout your illustrious career. How did you get to the journey? What was your journey to entrepreneurship?
Yeah. Well, good morning, and thanks so much, Shannon. I would have to say, going after you, Kim, is my story similar in the sense that though I had been in schools for 17 years before I transitioned to starting Global Prep, I didn't see schools that I wanted my daughter in either. And my child was in my own school when I was the principal. And so I'll say that I think the entrepreneurial route, while it sounds like something that doesn't fit in education, it actually really does. Because I think as teachers in the classroom, as a classroom teacher, I was constantly innovating. Because I was looking at what did my children have and what did my children need, and then making adjustments as such. And I found that once I became a principal in a district, I was kind of a middle manager. So that entrepreneurial spirit that I was able to have and execute in a classroom, I couldn't do in the same way as a principal in a district. And so what led me to that entrepreneurial route was that same passion that I had in the classroom, was seeing needs of my students and families and staff, but I couldn't make it happen at that school and in a school system like I was in. So the entrepreneurial route was natural in the sense that when you see something that needs to happen and it needs to be done, that drive is what pushed me to really create more of an opportunity for Black and Brown students to have the dual language opportunity that you often don't see with children that look like us and that come from low socioeconomic backgrounds.
Thank you, Mariama. And Errol, would you go next? Your route is a little different. Can you explain your journey to us?
Yeah, so just wonderful to be on this panel with everybody. Great to see everyone. My path was I was in law school thinking I was going to become a politician as a way to affect social change, and started mentoring. And it was through that mentoring experience that I really became passionate about education. But it was really out of school time education, so summer programs and after school programs. And really the entrepreneurship just came because the only way we could serve more and more children was if I learned a certain set of skills that would allow my organization to serve our children well and reach the many children who were looking for high quality summer learning programs and after school programs. So that's kind of the path that I took. Passion was the drive, and then you just had to learn the skills if you really wanted to do it well.
Thank you for that. And Dr. Green, last but not least.
Certainly. We came to this pathway, or I came into education when our firstborn was labeled educably unable to learn at the age of 5. And that turned us into people who left the corporate sector to start homeschooling our next 3 sons for the next 5 or 6 years. So our process was becoming education warriors, who then became, over that period of time, many of you who are listening may be familiar with Piaget, who was this educational researcher who focused on his 4 children. Well, my children became the Black Piaget children, okay? There's no school environment that we didn't try. Private school, public school, charter school, magnet schools, independent Black schools. My sons can tell you stories about how we navigated the education process, so that by the time I came to the NIC, I came to the NIC through a center that I founded at Temple University around inclusive competitiveness. And that process came to be because I decided the price of admission to get money to secure access to resources was through securing a PhD. And that PhD is in cognitive psychology with a focus on how do we leapfrog the cultural assets that allow our children to accelerate their learning. So that's how I got to this place, where our belief is that equity and equitable access to learning is through ownership of the process, the mindset, and the spirit of getting our children engaged in an innovation economy, either this generation or 2 generations ahead. So I'm hoping to just bring some of that thinking and experience. We work with thousands of young people, particularly in STEM education, which is my area of expertise. How we leapfrog Black children into owning the whole STEM enterprise as the future leaders of this country, frankly.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. You know, each of you have, such a wealth of experience. But what I know of all of you in your respective schools and organizations is that they're so different than traditional schools. And in many ways, every day you guys are like changing the narrative, and you have changed the narrative of what schools look like, what they should be, what they should provide to students. Can you talk a little bit about why you believe the school systems need to be disrupted, particularly relative to traditional education? Earl, we can start with you.
Sure. I mean, I think the traditional system is very comfortable with failure, and particularly comfortable with failure for our children. And so, many of our schools in Indianapolis are on the far east side. And the far east side for 2 decades, or for as long as there's been a grading system, had nothing really but F-rated schools and D-rated schools, and that was very, very comfortable. We all know the struggles of John Marshall. We know the graduation rates, so we know that for our children, and maybe I'm being naive, but if you believe that education can allow you to create and craft your future, that's only true if you get a good education, right? So if you are proficient in reading and writing, you're a critical thinker, you understand your roots and who you are and who you have the potential to become. And a lot of our schools don't do that for our children, and they really cut off the pathway to a better future.
Thank you for that. Mariama, do you have any thoughts to add?
Yeah, I would just add on, that I think if we look at the education system and the outcomes, it hasn't changed much in decades, and the outcomes haven't changed either. They just gotten worse. So if we are to believe that something better is there for our children, then we can't continue to do things as we've always done it. One of the things we often talk about, even with our staff, and our students that we have at Global Prep, we look at the education that our children are receiving and in low-income communities, and then you compare it to the suburbs, and it just looks very different. The way children walk in the halls, the work kids are given, what's considered to be good enough is very, very different. And so if we believe that our children are as capable, more capable, then we have to have a higher bar for excellence for them. And the fact that that bar hasn't existed and isn't existing in many schools like in low-income communities is part of the reason why major disruption is needed. And I'm excited about the work that we're doing in Indianapolis. Like you said, Shannon, while they're very different, we're all working to do that very thing, which is disrupt the outcomes that have been just too comfortable for Black and brown children.
Thank you for that. Kim, so Mariama, talked about, disrupting things and raising the bar. Earl mentioned, people are too comfortable with failure. You just recently opened your new school, and you had to go out and recruit. So you had to have these tough conversations with members of the community about how your school was going to be different, how you're not going to be comfortable with failure. Can you talk a little bit about that? And I think at the root, it gets to, being a strong entrepreneur and the qualities that are needed. So can you talk a little bit about your experience and more explicitly some of the qualities that are needed for strong education entrepreneurs?
Yes, definitely. I think Mariama elevated the school to prison pipeline. And for me, that was one of the major driving factors for disruption in the United States, not just in Indianapolis community, all over the country. I think that when I went out into the community and started talking to people about Believe and what we need to do differently, I think it's crucial that we get rid of exclusionary discipline practices. I think it's crucial that our kids see themselves in the curriculum. I think it's crucial that as we develop our school buildings, that the same high expectations for our students socially exist. So our students will have open campus. If open campus is okay for their affluent peers across the city, why can't our students go to Subway at lunch and be expected to learn how to get back to class on time, ready to learn? We don't set those expectations for them now. College then becomes an even further reach because by the time they leave us, they're going to have those skills, that autonomy that they're going to need to be successful, not only in college, but in the workforce. And we have to develop those skills. So for me as an entrepreneur, one of the things that's really important is that we've got to think innovatively. We've got to have high expectations, but we also have to create systems that are equitable for all children.
Thank you for that. Dr. Green, your organization works to build capacity for leaders, specifically at HBCUs and other organizations. Are there any qualities that our panelists did not mention that you, through your experience, feel that entrepreneurs especially need relative to education and growing great schools?
I think that's a great question. Thank you for that question. As a matter of fact, as I was listening to Kim's response, I was thinking to myself, what is the entrepreneurial mindset that education leaders have to have that really is not uncommon, frankly. We have people who've made millions, if not billions of dollars in the education community around owning real estate, around owning the curriculum, around owning the educational technology that's being used and tested with our children. So I think that as we work with producing more teachers of color in particular, who can then also imagine themselves as owners of the education process, we are looking at how to redefine what equity looks like. And because of the last year and a half, and I certainly want to make sure that I acknowledge and share deep empathy and sympathy for anyone who's lost a family member over the last 18 months, anyone who's lost children, who has seen children traumatized. We are in a really, this conversation is so critical because I'm in Philadelphia, you're in Indianapolis. What we're seeing is a national issue, is a global issue around what does equity look like as people talk about building back better and include in changing the education model. So some of the issues that we've seen with educational entrepreneurship is one, making sure that equity is defined as ownership of the process, not just the producers of future talent. That means education entrepreneurs who are listening or part of this conversation should own the real estate, should collaborate with parents to own the process of teaching children. So the models that we've worked with have been communal. So we'll use African-centered methodology to own some of the thinking process, to own some of the intergenerational mentoring process. So we provide on-ramps for people to own the process that their children are engaged in. And I think, again, the notion is that equity equals ownership, and ownership gets to freedom and liberation thinking. And so I think this is where we come in with the HBCUs that are uniquely positioned over the last 150 years to have produced teachers. They need to produce more teachers who understand this thing that we're in. And many have been turned away from teaching because of their own negative experiences in the education pipeline. So I think, again, that ownership model is very attractive to the current generation. Can we have a co-op that owns the building? Can we start our own curriculum that we license out to other people? That ownership model, that creativity provides multiple streams of revenue for the schools. And I think that's something, again, to think about as we're working across the different parts of the country that we're located in. We're seeing more of that entrepreneurial mindset come forward.
Great. I love when you said freedom and liberation thinking. That is so true. And I, attended Jackson State University, and certainly got that there. But when I visit the schools here in Indy, Mariama School and Kim School, they remind me so much of my HBCU experience. It's just, it's so exciting, to see the students be able to get, that rich of an education and have school leaders and examples like Earl, who are there in the flesh, who, they can learn from and be motivated by. So can you guys talk a little bit about the benefit of talented school leaders and having innovative school models? When I'm a product of IPS schools. I love IPS. But, frankly, when I went to school, there weren't a lot of Black educators. And the ones who were Black, were generally the PE teachers or, came in for after school activities. So it's very liberating, to use your word again, Dr. Green, to see, all of the great things that the schools here are doing. Can you guys talk a little bit about those benefits? And Earl, I'm particularly interested in hearing your perspective. as being a Black man in the education space, which is still, you know, an area that we've got to improve upon because there aren't many like you.
Well, thank you. I think, but thank you. Yeah, I mean, well, what's the benefits of it? I mean, I think Kim and Dr. Green and Miriam have shared, right? You can run unique programming like dual languages. You can make sure children are exposed to technology on a regular basis, not just going to a computer lab, but on a regular basis because they're going to need that skill. You can partner more deeply and authentically with families. You can extend the school year with programming. You can, in summer programming, you can extend the school day with unique clubs that make sure that our scholars understand our rich history and heritage. You know, we just launched a program right after George Floyd's murder for all of our family members called PLA University. So workforce development program for free for anybody who's related to a PLA scholar. And just actually had our first graduate. And so to see somebody go from going to a bad school, being underemployed, and now all of a sudden is making $35,000, $36,000 a year plus benefits, that to me, to see his joy, you can do things like that. And so you can have unique programs and unique relationships like that. So long-winded answer to say, you have a lot of flexibility and you have greater accountability as well. We won't be a school around for 10 years, 20 years, or 50 years if we're not serving our scholars well.
Yeah. Mariama, your school, when you opened your school, you know, it wasn't performing well. You were able to transform that school in what I consider record time. Can you talk about like how the benefits of your school model, your approach, your educators, how in real time they benefited students? Can you talk a little bit about that, especially coming from where those students were in the previous school year?
Yeah, well, I mean, definitely from where we started, which I think anytime, you know, an innovation school comes into an underperforming school, there's a whole lot of work to be done. And so while we have made some gains, we've got a lot of work still to do. What I will share is just connected to the first question you were asking. I think the importance of leaders of color being at the forefront of this work has just astronomical benefits for children. And one of those is that my prayer every day is in me and in our staff, our kids see themselves. Mm-hmm. And you can never underestimate that because I think, you know, to your point, when what children see of people of color are in the kitchen or cleaning up or are just the dean, that just isn't a real fair representation of what all they can be. Mm-hmm. And so from the very beginning, you know, that was important to us in our school. And I think in us, in our children, we also see ourselves. And so most of our staff were, I think, of the most diverse staff in the state of Indiana, according to the IDOE. And that's because it was really important that regardless, our children saw themselves in the staff. And so because of that passion for seeing the children as our own, we don't accept things that we wouldn't accept from our own children, from our children that we serve at school. There's a heart connection and a commitment to a community that isn't just one that we work in, but it's a community that we're committed to. And so what I've seen from our staff is, you know, the small things that that I've seen in previous schools that are acceptable. For example, children calling each other the N-word in class and it not being checked and dealt with. Mm-hmm. You know, that's something that if you cannot do that outside of school in a productive environment, we cannot allow kids to do that even on the playground at recess. Okay. So making sure that we hone in on those small things that develop the human being as well as the child as a scholar are important. Because I think we're focused on the whole child and not just the academics, while the academics are as important.
Thanks for that. Kim, you have high schoolers and, you know, they can be a different breed. Can you talk a little bit about how the benefits have specifically materialized with high schoolers? I know when I visit your school, I am just so excited to see how giddy the kids are. You know, they're high schoolers, but they're giddy and they're excited. And, you know, sometimes when you go to high schools, you know, the kids are just stone-faced and serious or angry, and yours are like happy and delighted. It's it's weird, but great. We'll talk about the benefits and what you've done intentionally to foster that sort of a culture within your school.
Yep. So our model is designed for just that: how to bring the joy, the love, agents, students back into our schools. And one of the things that I think is key to our dynamic is that we have what's called our village model. So all of our students have a group of a peer group that they can relate to, and a village leader on site, advisor of sorts, who's there to be with them and be their homeschool connection. So this person meets with their families 4 times a year. This person, if they have a quince, they're going to go to the quince. If they're have a funeral of a family member, that's who's going to go. So we also bridge that homeschool connection through that person. And I think that makes every student have a strong sense of belonging in the building. And I think that's where you see, Shannon, just the happiness and joy, because everybody feels accepted. No one's sitting in the cafeteria by themselves. Mm-hmm. We don't have that level of isolation or exclusion in our community. And we want all of our kids to be seen and heard and loved and supported. And I think that comes through with our model.
Thanks for that. Joy is truly what your school has, and it's so exciting. I love going to visit. Dr. Green, Mariama touched on this a little bit, but can you talk about why it's so important for leaders for people of color to enter the education field, especially as you work with organizations nationwide, to like build capacity and to recruit? Why is that so important?
I want to pick up on some of the broadcasts from the vice president of Ivy Tech, who was speaking before our panel. And she was talking about her role as the head of DEI for her institution. And what I wanted to share is I want to level set what we're seeing around the United States. And I want to share with you, Shannon, that the provost of Jackson State University just joined the board of the NIC. So I just want to let you know there's a family relationship here. Okay.
I love it.
But one of the realities that we've run into as an organization, our mission is to move gross domestic product 1% in one generation. That means the productivity of Black folks contributing to America's economy will move 1% in one generation. Now, we speak about that in a way that resonates with folks who are interested and deeply concerned that the shift in demographics to Black and brown children being the majority of the K-12 community as of 2014 will somehow undermine America's competitiveness because we're just not ready. Mm-hmm. If you talk about the polarization that's going on in the United States behind who owns this country, much of the concern is that, to quote Malcolm, the chickens are coming home to roost in terms of the educational access, the lack of strategic planning, and the lack of investment that allows our entrepreneurs to really not only open one school, but to see Kim's school, the Believe School, become a franchise, right? To see the Global Academy become a global institution. So what is happening now is America's in panic mode. And so the panic mode says that it's not negotiable that we become education entrepreneurs and leaders. We have the access and the cultural ability to relate to more children than the majority community does right now. Our children are disconnected, especially over this last year and a half. They have seen how clear it is that they don't have access to education. So whether it's online or out of line, I'm going to channel the work of Amos Wilson, Asa Hilliard, Margaret Beal Spencer, and Gloria Latson to say that our culture can accelerate our children's cognition if we understand the cultural assets that our children are bringing to the table. Project-based learning is made for Black children. That's aligned with our culture of community, of call and response, of intergenerational, of mentoring. So if you look at some of the buzzwords now, it is our educational leaders who can bring those cultural assets to bear, again, in ways that other people are not interpreting. Skill and kill and drill, co-curricular planning, all of those are tactics that are very important. But the number one issue is that America is a predominantly Black and brown education community of children now. Mm-hmm. Who knows what the cultural assets are that they bring to the table better than the mothers, the fathers, the aunts, the uncles, and all the people who have the capacity to lead education forward as we did 150 years ago.
So true. Miriam, I saw you nodding your head. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Besides amen, no. Well said.
Hallelujah, right? Sure. Let's talk a little bit about the pandemic. COVID-19, you talk about disruption. It disrupted education in the traditional way and non-traditional way. And it was just a very difficult time. And we all had to kind of reacclimate and think on our feet. And you all had to innovate in ways that you hadn't previously. Talk a little bit about some of the systems or the innovations that you implemented during the pandemic that you'd like to see continue on. Or maybe if you didn't implement it directly, maybe you've observed from other entities. And Errol, we can start with you.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that, we believed in at PLA and I've always believed in is just the importance of partnering with parents. And so I actually liked the fact that the pandemic forced schools that oftentimes don't want the parents to be involved, don't want the parents to be, don't want to talk to the parents, don't want the parents in the school. They had to go through the parents to get to the scholars. And so I hope that districts, carry that forward. I mentioned it before, we had about 18% of our scholars. And now we're at 100% of our scholars having that. So that access to technology, which really put our scholars at a disadvantage, both for the future, but even just for state testing, which is online. Our kids were trying to get this the first time. You can't go from paper pencil and expect to do as well as somebody who has a computer and is playing with it every single day. So I hope that gets carried forward as well. For me personally, I was traveling 40 weeks a year before this pandemic hit, and I will never be doing that again. So I'll carry that forward as well. So I like this model of less travel, but those are some of the things that we hope to carry forward.
Awesome. Kim, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, for me, I think the concept of kids being able to learn virtually. So just picking up off of Earl, not only did they get the technology they needed, they had access in terms of internet. Being able to hand out hotspots to families who didn't have consistent internet before was just a blessing. And to have students who may have transportation issues or transiency issues or have to stay home to keep siblings because mom has to work to still be able to access school was game changing and like a different level of a blessing in terms of student attendance, especially at the high school level where attendance tends to decline at a certain age.
Mariama?
Yeah, I would just add on that, especially given the challenges that we saw with technology and this whole tech literacy gap, I feel like the pandemic really forced families and schools and kids to really become stronger when it came to the tech literacy and what platforms we use and what's now just a part of our repertoire across families and students and staff. So things like our Google Meets are now just a part of what we do. And I never would have thought 5 years ago that we would be sending an invite to a parent and it'd be a Google Meet, but now that's just the norm. And at the end of the year, we did a parent survey with what are the things that you hope remain with the post-pandemic. And several of the things came through from parents, one being Zoom parent-teacher conferences. While we love to be eye-to-eye, face-to-face, paper at the table, for all of our families, it's not the most feasible, but we had a huge increase in parent participation in conferences, all 3 conferences of the year, because it was easier to access families in a way that met the needs of the school and also the family. And then additionally, I'll just share that, the understanding, the real clear transparency that we have just as a school organization or even our board around the gap when it came to MiFi and internet access was completely illuminated. And so, I remember I thought, we probably have about 100 families that don't have internet. Well, once we really got down to the bone and it came down to making sure we could educate kids, we had significantly more than that, like 250. And so as a result, now in our budget are MiFis that will continue for families. So at the beginning of the year, when we pass out supplies for kids who don't have internet, they get the MiFi along with the computer so that we know when we have these asynchronous days or there's a closure, all kids can access school because they have the resources to do it.
That's tremendous. That's great. Thank you. Thank you all for that. Dr. Green, I know Nick, as I mentioned before, and you mentioned, it works to build the capacity of leaders, but also the surrounding community and global partners. How can inclusive competitiveness help communities of color achieve more equitable outcomes? And what type of investment would you say it takes to build the infrastructure of ensuring an inclusive education? What does that tangibly look like?
Shannon, you're on fire with the great questions. Okay, sis. So here's our here's what we are identifying as the outcome measure, and then we'll reverse engineer from that. And the outcome measure is the degree to which we are producing young people who are, and frankly, the current generation. So we're not just looking ahead, but we're looking at current people who can access this innovation economy. What does that look like? It looks like in every community we go to, we work first and foremost with a document, and hopefully you're all familiar with this, called the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy, the CEDS. I'm hoping you all are familiar with it. If you're not, and this is the first time you're hearing it, your homework, leaders, is to understand that this CEDS drives all of the investment in any region economically, which includes workforce development, talent development. So every municipality has to submit a CEDS to the federal government. That CEDS is then invested to the tune of billions of dollars by the Economic Development Administration. That document forecasts ahead 5 to 10 years what any region is going to focus its energy on. So having said the word energy, I would say to you, and again, what we saw coming through the education process, and even my daughter, this is her senior year coming up. She is so happy to go back to school. But what we saw was an overemphasis on schooling, as if being virtual somehow meant you weren't getting as much as you were if you were in person. And now I'm going to talk to you about the pain of that, right? And why we are measuring the economic impact of this. So we had a lot of teachers, and forgive me if this is not in your school, if this does not apply, but if you were terrible and boring face-to-face, you were terrible and boring online. Yeah. So my daughter shifted her interest in biosciences to marine biology, specifically because she had a mentor who came online who also talked about the fact that biology is a major economic driver where we are. So when you look at the CEDS and you look at the forecast for what the region is going to want, those schools that align themselves for 10 years out with that type of investment are going to see much more success. So it's great to have the fundamentals, reading, writing, arithmetic, those things never go out of style. But the alignment through your schools to an Ivy Tech to the next iteration of what their career objectives are going to be defined if you want them to be place-based scholars and you want them to be economic contributors. Look at the CEDS, align some of your out-of-school time earlier you were talking about, some of your workforce talent development, align it with that CEDS document, and it will increase your likelihood of providing on-ramps into the innovation economy, whether it's through STEM or somewhere else. I would just say to you, what we're looking at, again, Shannon, around the world is the impact of agriculture as a science. You'll see a sign behind me that says the chemistry of biology. We are teaching people how to make extraordinary amounts of money with the fact that we are not growing enough food, we're not sequestering carbon, we're not creating energy alternatives. All of those are opportunities that, again, many of my white peers who control access to resources and where I got millions of dollars, their fear is that we don't understand enough. We're not producing enough people who understand the UN Sustainable Development Goals and how they apply locally. So that's how the NIC brings forward both the on-the-ground CEDS with the future forecasts of America's economy to make sure that our kids are competitive locally, but aware what's happening globally. Not to borrow your school's name, Miriam, but it's spot on. So I hope I answered your question.
You did. That was great. Thank you so much. Kim, as I was thinking about Believe and what you had to endure to open your school, And even at the conclusion of its first year, I mean, you did all that through a whole pandemic, which I know was, presented its own set of challenges. Can you talk a little bit about that experience and specifically what you learned from that process around like leadership and vision and long-term, like what you'll carry forward through that process?
Definitely. I mean, there were some clear tangibles, like enrollment was down significantly for us. We're tripling in enrollment this year compared to where we were last year for the pandemic. But I think in terms of vision and leadership, you can have a well-baked plan and then definitely get hit in the face. And I think that's what happened to us last year as we thought about even like what our culture system was to develop our students' agency and autonomy. We had this awesome plan that required kids to be in person and be able to talk to each other and interact with each other. Yeah. And then we ended up in a situation where kids weren't able to be within 6 feet of each other. Classroom size got decreased. Kids weren't able to pass in the hallway. So although we had all of these like great ideas in the onset, we had to pivot. So I think one of the things that it highlighted for me is like all strong leaders have to be able to pivot in the moment and be ready to change course. And keep your values true. So we wanted to make sure kids still felt seen, loved, and heard. How do we do that in this new world order where you almost couldn't even get close to people or smile at each other because you got the mask on? So we had to definitely get creative. Back to what I said around innovation, we had to get creative around ways like going outside a lot, spending a lot more time outdoors doing activities than we anticipated initially. To make sure that our students and our staff still got the opportunity to have as close to a true freshman year of high school as we could get them to. So I would definitely say being able to focus on the things that matter and being able to ignore all the extra noise.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Earl, you are probably the most, if not the, one of the most successful Black male educators in the country. You have 25 schools in 5 states and in the District of Columbia. So I'm really interested to know, like, what advice do you have for your colleagues locally here who may be interested in scaling up? What advice do you have? And also, it'd be important to talk about not losing quality. Oftentimes people scale up, but the quality of their product diminishes. So can you talk a little bit about what advice you have and how they can sustain the quality of their schools and organizations?
Yeah, I guess the advice I have is do it better than I do it. So that would be my first piece of advice. I mean, we've had some modicum of success in terms of changing culture and getting some schools to A rating because of student growth. But we have a long way to go, to be honest with you. And we're far from the mountaintops. I guess the advice for those who are growing is really feel good about your program model. Doesn't have to be 100% done, but have it 90% baked. I think the second piece is understand your business model so that as you grow, you need more philanthropy or you actually generating more revenue. We turn around failing schools, so we are fee-for-service model. So we're getting more revenue every time we bring on a new school. So that business model supports the piece. And then talent, and making every investment early in making sure you have enough talent to lead each one of your schools. And then obviously you have talent to lead each one of your classrooms. So those are some of the pieces of advice that, I might share, but PLA has a long way to go.
Thanks for that. And Mariama, your school, it just completed its 5th year. And you were one of the first innovation schools in the city, and you infiltrated a very traditional, rigid system. So how does that feel 5 years later? Like, what were you feeling that first year, and what do you know for sure here in year 5?
Yeah. Well, I would say what I was feeling in the first year was like, why did I do this? And I'm being very candid because I think that, people look at starting a new school and they think, oh, how hard could it be? I've led schools before. It's a flip. It's whatever you think it is, it's 15 times harder than that. Mm-hmm. And that's what I tell people all the time for the things that we talked about today. One is the education piece. The other is the business piece. And the other is the real challenge we all have, which is recruiting talent. Because you can have the best laid plans, but if you don't have people on the ground that you can train and execute and deeply believe that it's possible, then it's going to be even that much more challenging. So I'll say that now as we finish our 5th year, we're going into year 6, which we're calling year 2.0, because there's so much that we learned in these first 5 years, because now we deeply know our community. We deeply know what works and what does not work. And we also are trying to stand on the things that we have been successful at. When I came into this work, I had turned around the school that I was leading. We had increased 20 percentage points in 2 years in reading and math. And it was in a traditional system. And so my complete vision of success was only academics. And as we look at the finish of our 5th year, we have a lot of academic work to do, but we have a foundation now of a learning culture, a positive culture, a behavioral structural culture, a team culture that high academics can't exist without. So I would say that it's really important for leaders to really define what success is, and not just by one narrow vision of success, but by a broad vision, because that's what we have to do, because otherwise, we could finish year 5 and say, we haven't done anything, but actually we've done a lot. And we are now set up for what I believe will be the best 5 years that we ever could have had because of the foundation that we laid in our first 5 years.
Amazing. Thank you so much. This has been such a phenomenal panel discussion. I want to give you guys maybe 30 seconds, 20 if you're really good, to provide any closing remarks that you might have. And we can start with you, Dr. Green.
I think the most powerful thing that I've heard is the voices that I've heard today. It makes my life easier knowing that, look, I know that there are people who are focusing not just on aggregating data, but on collaborating, and that the collaboration will elevate the idea that culture dictates cognition. That's the one gift that I can share with you. The cultural assets that our children have, and we'll share those in the future, will accelerate their cognition in ways that we have never seen before, especially because of this last year and a half. The cat is out of the bag, y'all. Our kids can learn a variety of ways. You guys get to benefit from that. So I thank you for all the extraordinary work that you're doing. It's completely inspirational. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Green. Kim? Any closing remarks, Kim?
Yes, we need leaders at all levels. So if you know that that's something that you have the itch for, we need leaders in the boardroom. We need leaders in school leadership. We need leaders in the funding sector. We need leaders across the board. And it's room for all of us. So just want to put that push to all the people who are listening. Like, if it's something that you're thinking about, take that extra step, get that certification, have that conversation, start thinking about what your contribution is going to be for the culture, because we need you.
Awesome. Mariama?
I would just say that, when you have big visions for what you want to accomplish, recognize you cannot do it alone, and you're going to have to collaborate and build a team around the things that you may not be good at. No one's good at everything. So build your team intentionally, rely on your team, and communicate and uplift your team in order to get to where the ultimate goal is, which is success for our schools.
Awesome. Earl, in words.
I'd encourage everybody to be, as the other panelists there, either an entrepreneur or an entrepreneur. And we need leadership. And as hard as leadership can be sometimes, if we look back at our history and see what we had to come through to get here, it actually pales in comparison. So I hope you step forward. I hope you take a leadership role in whatever role that is, as Kim shared. And our kids need us, and they need us yesterday.
Yeah. For sure, the need is certainly there. Well, thank you all so much for participating. This has been such a lively discussion. I really appreciate it. I've been getting texts throughout the conversation. People are enjoying it. So congratulations to you all. And thank you to InnoPower and the Indianapolis Recorder newspaper for inviting the Mind Trust to participate in this conference. It's been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shannon.